Hey guys, it's been a very long time since I've made some content and I apologize for that. So before I hop into this video, I just want to thank every single one of my subscribers for being here. Most of you guys have been here from the beginning, which really means a lot, and I can tell because, my subscriber count hasn't really shifted at all, except upward since I started making videos on this channel. So I appreciate every single one of you guys. Some of you guys I recognize from my streams and from comments in my videos. And I've even gotten a few comments in more recent videos of, hey, don't give up, keep making content. And I felt really bad about that. So I appreciate you guys for still sticking around, being here. And I don't want to make any promises of any new upcoming content because I can't promise anything. But if you like this, and you like how it goes, I appreciate your support. And if you want to subscribe, feel free. If not, I don't know when I'm going to make another video again. I never really do. But with that preface out of the way, I think it's also important to note exactly what my channel is for anyone coming across this video that may have migraines and not dyspraxia, or that may just be coming across my channel for the first time. Sometimes the algorithm just randomly pumps up random small YouTubers. I see random small YouTubers in my subscriptions all the time, and it's really weird. So, not that I'm complaining. If I do get a bunch of new subs, that's cool. But for anyone new, as I was trying to get into when I started this whole tangent, dyspraxia is the primary focus of this channel. And dyspraxia is a neurodevelopmental disorder that affects planning of movements, balance, and coordination. And in this channel, a lot of what I talk about is things that are comorbid with dyspraxia, or things that also exist alongside dyspraxia. And even amongst the dyspraxia community, which is already a niche community, considering how little visibility dyspraxia has compared to other neurodevelopmental disorders like autism and ADHD, there's still a common consensus of things that are typically seen comorbid with dyspraxia that we can all agree with. Things like anxiety, panic attacks, depression. ADHD is very commonly seen alongside dyspraxia, but, it's not necessarily something that's always, as I am one of the apparently few individuals who doesn't have any comorbidity with autism or ADHD. But that's a story for another time. Amongst the dyspraxia community, however, there are some comorbids that just don't come up in conversation very often, which I'm actually surprised about. And one of those is migraines, because migraines are actually a very common, so to speak. I don't want to say common because that implies that more people than average have them. And that's not entirely true, but when it comes to headache disorders and pain disorders, migraines tend to be very overrepresented. So migraines are relatively common amongst the general community of humanity, but amongst dyspraxics, we don't typically talk about migraines. Although I did do a Reddit post not too long ago asking how many dyspraxics also suffer from migraines, and I've gotten a lot of hits and upvotes and even comments on that post, and therefore I felt like this was a very apt topic to talk about, especially because I've noticed, at least recently as I've gotten older, my migraines have increased in both frequency and intensity. And that kind of sucks, honestly. But this video will exist not only to hopefully help others with migraines see that not only are they not alone, but also help other dyspraxics who also have migraines see that they're not alone. But also kind of touch on just the topic of migraines in general, because migraines suck. They really suck, and I am getting sick of them. But also, I do tend to get a lot more longer comments on my YouTube videos and a little bit more reach on my YouTube videos than I do on my Reddit posts. So I also do want to hear some more from other dyspraxics or even just other migraine sufferers in general, just about their experience with migraines and see just how prevalent it is, not only in the general community, but in the dyspraxia community, as I am somewhat of a notable member of it, despite my relatively low subscriber count. So migraines are what are commonly known as a headache disorder, and that they are a disorder that tends to be notable or primarily marked by headaches. That being said, a migraine is more than just a bad headache, as media tends to depict them. And so I think in order to talk about what migraines exactly are, we need to talk about what they aren't. So I will caution the individual if they haven't seen the time on this video already. But this is going to be a long video because first I want to talk about other headache disorders and how they may or may not correlate with dyspraxia at first. Really ain't an Oren Milne video without nicotine. So, let's talk about first nicotine withdrawal and nicotine overuse headaches. Something I bring up in my videos all the time is how many dyspraxics smoke, and I've detailed it in multiple videos as to why dyspraxics smoke, or most of them tend to. So I'm not going to go too deep into it here, but it's important to note that if you say smoke too much, or if you're like me and you dip too much, you can get a headache from that. If you are a regular smoker or a regular dipper, and then you quit, you can also get a headache from that, or even if you've just gone too long without a cigarette, or too long without a dip or vape, or however you consume your nicotine. What makes these unique from migraines is that the headache is typically dull. It usually doesn't last very long, at most maybe an hour or two. And typically if you take any over-the-counter non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug like say an ibuprofen or a Tylenol, usually it just kills the headache right then and there. And typically once you're fully withdrawn from the cigarette, dip, or other tobacco product, or if it's in the case of a withdrawal headache, as soon as you consume something like say nicotine gum, if you are quitting, or if you've just gone too long and you smoke or dip or whatever again, typically the headache goes away. When you have a migraine, smoking, not smoking, it doesn't matter. The pain is there, regardless. Also, I will touch on the aura later in this video. This is a thing that separates migraines from pretty much every other headache disorder. So as I will discuss it further later on in this video, I will just say this: in both nicotine headaches and every other headache I mentioned from here on out, these headaches are also distinct in that they don't have an aura. And again, I will go into more detail about what the aura is later on. So the next form of headache that is commonly seen alongside migraine, surprisingly, but is distinct from a migraine, is something known as a tension headache. And a tension headache you'll know is a tension headache because it feels like a headband around the head. Now, tension headaches are typically caused by, well, tension. Typically, they're triggered by stress, although they can also be triggered by muscular issues, like if, say, you're tensed up too often or you have poor posture or whatever. This can cause tension headaches. Also, if you do have hypertension or high blood pressure, this can also be a stressor for tension headaches. Now, tension headaches do have a similar level of pain to migraines. They can be commonly seen alongside migraines, although you will notice the distinction not only because of the placement of the headache, typically feeling like a headband around the head, as I said, but typically, again, there's no aura. The pain tends to be more of a tightening pain because it feels like a headband, as opposed to a migraine, which feels like more of a throbbing pain or even a pounding pain. Most tension headaches tend not to last very long. If you do have a migraine disorder, or you do just have occasional migraines and then you have a tension headache, it can lead into a migraine, which can just be a nasty 1-2 punch. And similar to other headache disorders, typically with a tension headache, usually they can be relieved through just typical over-the-counter medication. Unless you do have it alongside a migraine, then over-the-counter medication will only help so much. Maybe relieve the tension headache, but not really do much for the migraine. I would argue that of all the other headache types that can be compared to or are seen alongside migraines, tension headaches are probably really common in the dyspraxic community, even amongst those who don't have migraines, just because a lot of tension headaches are caused by muscular issues, And one of the common features of dyspraxia is something known as hypotonia, in that poor muscle tone. Therefore, we tend to be more prone to pulling muscles, even just doing simple tasks. We also tend to be more sedentary just because it takes the body and brain more time to just do simple tasks. It's kind of the benchmark symptom of dyspraxia. It's something known as executive dysfunction, which I do really want to do a video about. And guys, remind me, fucking bug me on Discord or whatever if you have to. Just remind me. I really want to do that video on executive dysfunction. But point being, I wouldn't be surprised if the vast majority of dyspraxics, even if they don't suffer migraines, at least suffer tension headaches from time to time. Dyspraxia also makes you more prone to things like anxiety and panic attacks, and also just more prone to stress in general, and therefore stress is a stressor to tension headaches. It's also a stressor to migraines, but I'll touch on that a little later. Next would be cluster headaches. Cluster headaches are very, very painful headaches that are typically right behind the eye when they're felt. Personally, I don't have any experience with cluster headaches like I do with the previously mentioned headaches, so I cannot speak from personal experience when talking about cluster headaches. Even amongst migraine sufferers, they seem relatively rare, although many migraine sufferers also suffer from cluster headaches. Typically, even in a migraine sufferer, the cluster headaches are different. You don't usually see one alongside the other or one leading into the other, at least from what I've read in like posts and reports in the literature. Although having both, I can imagine, is just absurdly painful, and I wouldn't wish them on anybody. Cluster headaches are called cluster headaches because they happen in clusters, typically clusters of 3. They tend to be episodic and therefore aren't usually triggered by anything necessarily. They just kind of happen on an episodic basis. For some individuals, it could be monthly, for some weekly, and for some really unfortunate individuals, even daily. They're called cluster headaches because they come in clusters. So I think I said that already, but that's really the key thing. So what an individual will experience is these very, very painful headaches. Like even compared to migraines, they've been said to be worse than migraines. And they happen usually 3 in a row. So typically you'll have just this really bad pain behind your eye, a very absurdly painful headache behind the eye that typically doesn't last as long as, say, a migraine or even like a sinus headache or a tension headache. And that's kind of what's neat and unique about cluster headaches, is that they tend to not last very long, but because they happen in these 3 clusters in succession, they can be very debilitating, especially because they happen frequently, especially in individuals who get them weekly or even daily. Again, they're distinct from migraines in the fact that they don't last as long. They come in clusters, as migraines can be episodic, but they typically don't follow the same episodic formula that cluster headaches do. Migraines are incredibly, incredibly painful, don't get me wrong, and I will never say a migraine isn't a painful thing, but typically when it comes to cluster headaches, in many cases they're called suicide headaches colloquially because the pain is so bad that some individuals wish to commit suicide. I've had migraines that were pretty bad, bordering on that, but I've never had any migraine have me at such a point where I was like, damn, I can't handle life anymore because of them. So obviously that's the subjective thing. I know many migraine sufferers whose migraines are that bad or have a pain that's even rivaling cluster headaches. Migraines are kind of very variable from person to person, but in general, cluster headaches tend to be seen as worse. In many cases, the medications prescribed for migraines like triptans and CGRP inhibitors and other medications that work for migraines don't work for cluster headaches. Triptans might, I think triptans tend to work for both. I'm not entirely sure on that. I'm going to have to look that up later. But for the most part, cluster headaches are distinct both in severity, length, and the fact that they're typically episodic, usually without a stressor. Migraines can be both episodic, stressed, or either or both. So it's kind of what separates cluster headaches and migraines. I don't have personal experience with cluster headaches, so I don't want to say much more than that. I don't know exactly what causes them. Not many people do. As I'll touch on with migraines, not many people understand what causes migraines either, because there could be a whole number of different causes. There's a lot of different things that seem to cause migraines in different people. So with cluster headaches, it seems like there's a lot less information, even compared to migraines, on what causes cluster headaches and how to properly treat them. So, yeah, that's really where I'll leave it with cluster headaches. I really don't want to keep talking about something that I really don't have any experience with. And finally, sinus headaches. Sinus headaches are typically headaches as a result of a sinus infection, allergies, or a cold. Typically, they're felt specifically within the sinuses. The facial sinuses, obviously, so under here, above here, and in the little nasal area. If you feel this kind of pain in here, it typically feels like a pressure. And again, it's almost always a result of a sinus infection, a cold, allergies, even the flu can give you a sinus headache. And it's actually estimated that the vast majority of sinus headache sufferers are actually experiencing migraines, and they are being misdiagnosed as sinus headaches. What makes sinus headaches distinct is that they're typically not even seen as their own headache disorder. If you do have a sinus headache, it's typically the result of one of the above I mentioned. If you don't have a cold, you don't have allergies, or you don't have the flu, 9 times out of 10, you're not having a sinus headache, you're having a migraine. And there's a lot of parallels between the two, as, sinus headaches do have a similar point of where the pain is. Typically with a migraine, the pain can be up here. Migraines are usually unilateral, which means they usually typically only affect one side of the head. And typically it'll be up here, for me at least, but I'll also feel it around my eye. And this is something that I personally resonate with the most, because ever since I was a kid, I've been having migraines that I always thought were just really bad sinus headaches, because I've always been prone to sinus infections. I've always been prone to colds. I don't know if that's a dyspraxia thing or not, but I've just always had if it was cold, I would get colds really easily. In the summer, especially when the pollen count's really high, my nose is always runny, my eyes are always watery, it's always real gross and sick. So personally, I just always made that connection and assumed that when I had these really bad headaches, it's just another damn sinus headache again. Although after a while, I would notice that typically an ibuprofen or a Tylenol wouldn't do much for them, and I'd end up just turning off all my lights and going to sleep, which should be your first indication that you're having migraines and not a sinus headache, if anything. Now, typically, again, migraines are unilateral, only affecting one side of the head, but not always, so that's not really your distinctive, thing where it's like, okay, this is affecting both sides, it's clearly in my sinuses, so therefore, it's not a migraine. Don't think that, because sinus headaches do typically, have that presentation, but migraines can have the exact same presentation. And what I've found in many cases, not just for me, but for other people I've read about and saw, typically really bad sinus issues can be a stressor or a cause for migraines even. Many people have what they call sinus migraines, which is a migraine that is set off either by allergies or by a cold. And therefore, you should really be proactive and try to, notice that what you're experiencing may not just be a sinus headache. And if you do get them with a lot more frequency than seems like normal, 9 times out of 10, you're having a migraine. Typically with a sinus headache, once your cold is relieved or once you take some nasal spray or whatever, the headache usually goes away with it. The headache is almost always a result of the sinus pressure. So once you relieve that sinus pressure, usually the headache goes away with it. That's all the headache is, it's the sinus pressure. With a migraine, no amount of sinus relief, no amount of allergy medication, Benadryl, Afrin, Claritin, whatever you take, is really going to make the headache go away. It may relieve some of the secondary symptoms, but it's not going to get rid of the actual headache itself. And as aforementioned, in almost all of the headaches I mentioned, sinus headaches don't have an aura. And that's something that I should have picked up on a long time ago when I started noticing auras and stuff. That's probably not a sinus headache if I'm seeing shit. But regardless, sinus headaches are very prevalent, especially with climate change. It's estimated by many climate scientists and other individuals who focus on meteorology and barometric pressure that sinus infections, and especially since COVID, people seem to be getting sick a lot easier lately. But also along with climate change, it seems like allergies and the pollen count have been getting just higher and lasting longer with longer summers and the higher temperatures. So, sinus headaches are a lot more prevalent and a lot more common and a lot more frequent than they used to be. And that can also add to the confusion as to whether you're having a sinus headache or a migraine, because you may be having a sinus headache for multiple days at a time or a lot longer than you may have used to, and therefore may just assume that you're having a really bad sinus headache, and you may not be able to tell if it's a sinus headache or a migraine or not. And this is when you typically go and see an ear, nose, and throat doctor, or even a neurologist might actually take a look at your sinuses just to make sure that you're not having just sinus inflammation. Because sinus headaches, they typically don't come with nausea, but if you do have, say, a bad sinus infection or a cold or allergy, what can happen is something called postnasal drip, where the mucus that's in your sinuses drains down the back of your throat and into your stomach, which irritates your stomach, and that can cause nausea. And migraines are typically associated with the headache plus the nausea. So that adds to confusion, although the nausea caused by migraines is typically more prevalent, where with the nausea caused by postnasal drip, while it's not pleasant, typically isn't as overbearing as the nausea from a headache. Another distinct thing about migraines is that migraines cause sensitivity to light, sensitivity to sound. That's not something that's typically seen in sinus headaches, but that can also add to the confusion. Is if you're dyspraxic and have sinus headaches, you may think you have a migraine, just because dyspraxia, not only being comorbid with autism and ADHD, which also have sensory processing issues, but dyspraxia on its own can cause sensory processing issues, which means that you may already inherently have a sensitivity to light or a sensitivity to sound, regardless of any headache disorder you could possibly have. And therefore, now you're experiencing pain or pressure right here around the eyes. You're experiencing nausea, say from the postnasal drip. And on top of dyspraxia, ADHD, autism, whatever, you have the sensitivity to light. And now you can be convinced you're having a migraine. So really, this is where I usually always preface my videos on medical topics by saying you should always see a licensed medical professional. But this especially is where you should really be seeking the advice of a professional over just doing your own research or just going by feel or symptoms, simply because there are a lot of parallels between the two, and they're not mutually exclusive either. You can have sinus headaches and migraines as well. So very much try to do your research. This is where this kind of comes to me personally. I have been dealing with these headaches for ever since I could remember. So I was at least a little kid experiencing these headaches, and it wasn't until October of 2024 when I had a really bad headache that was lasting up to 5 days. Tylenol wasn't doing anything. I had a sensitivity to light. I was ridiculously nauseous, and I was worried, and I decided to go to the ER just to make sure there wasn't something more serious going on. And that's when they basically said, hey, all your symptoms are benchmark symptoms of migraines. And they basically diagnosed me with a migraine in the emergency room. And since then I've been tracking them, and I've noticed that, thanks to my app, I've realized that, I've been having migraines this whole time. And now there are two more other headaches that are distinct from migraines that I want to talk about, but I will preface this. I don't want anyone freaking out. These are Not something that you'll experience on a regular basis. If you do typically experience migraines or sinus headaches or any of the previous headaches, and you have a really bad headache that's kind of like the ones you already experience, it's always better to get checked if you are worried or concerned. But typically, you don't have to worry about these unless you do have a predisposition to something like hypertension or have a heart condition or some sort of issue with clotting and so on. But those two headaches would be intracranial hypertension or a hypertensive crisis and aneurysms. Now, aneurysms are obviously a medical emergency, so is a hypertensive crisis. A hypertensive crisis is caused by a significant spike in your blood pressure, in that your blood pressure is so high that you're basically on the border of a stroke or a heart attack. These headaches don't typically come with most other symptoms, or the other symptoms that you would have are completely muted because it is, as is described in the medical literature, as the worst headache of one's life. And you know, when you have a headache so bad that the only way medical literature can describe it as is worst headache of your life, like official medical literature, then yes, you should probably go to the ER. You will know you're having one of these issues if your headache is bad enough to warrant medical attention. If you are having a headache as a result of an aneurysm about to burst or as a result of a hypertensive crisis, you probably won't be sitting through this video. You would not make it through half of this video. You wouldn't have made it to this point in this video if you are having a hypertensive crisis or are having an aneurysm that's about to burst. It is an unbelievable amount of pain, even compared to migraines and cluster headaches. And if you, by some chance, are watching this video and experience the worst headache humanly imaginable, and you literally cannot function at all, please shut this video off and go to the emergency room right now. Alright, that's all. And I don't mean to worry anyone. That's part of why I put this part so late in the video. Just because if you've made it this far in this video, you probably have nothing to worry about. I know we as dyspraxics and even migraine sufferers are prone to anxiety. So just as some sort of comfort, if you have made it this far in this video and are still suffering like some kind of migraine or whatever and are able to watch this video, you're alright. Trust me, you're okay. So with that out of the way, now I can finally discuss what exactly a migraine is. And the problem is that you can't easily define a migraine. Like I said, it is not a really bad headache. Migraines usually come in 4 phases, and I will discuss these phases in depth in a minute. But I really need to drive home the fact that, you know, it should kind of prove the point that in those last headaches I was able to generalize them relatively easily, where with a migraine I really can't. Migraines are different from person to person. And I mean, that's the same for all things. Even those headaches I mentioned before may be different from person to person. Some people might have really bad sinus headaches that kind of border migraines but aren't migraines. Some people may have nicotine withdrawal headaches that are just really bad and like suck a lot and may come with some nausea, because nausea can be a symptom of, you know, the headaches from nicotine withdrawal. But like, all in all, you can really generalize them and kind of eliminate a migraine just by looking at the symptoms of those headaches. Where with a migraine, it's distinct, it's individual from person to person, it is triggered by different triggers from person to person. A good example would be something like chocolate or orgasms. Orgasms especially can be very helpful to some individuals with migraines. For some reason, they get some relief from orgasms, where other people, orgasms can just make them worse. Same with chocolate. Chocolate, a lot of people find some relief in consuming chocolate. For some reason, chocolate eases their migraines. Where other people, chocolate is a trigger. And if they eat chocolate, it can trigger a migraine. So, between triggers and causes, there are a few different things that seem to cause migraines. One of the typical ones has to do with blood pressure. Another one has to do with just stress. Like I said in the last section, Sometimes sinus headaches or other kinds of headaches can trigger a migraine and lead to them. So even the basis of the migraine alone is kind of hard to define, let alone the actual migraine itself. So the best way to really describe and define what a migraine is to go through typically the 4 phases that migraines tend to follow. The first is what is known as the prodrome phase, and that is before the actual migraine itself. This can last anywhere from 8 to 2 to 24 hours depending on the person. It is almost like the calm before the storm, so to speak. It is when you can typically feel a migraine coming on, and this is where that aura I mentioned is. Now, not everybody who has migraines has an aura, but typically they do have some degree of prodrome. As I mentioned earlier, in many cases, muscle tension or muscle stiffness, including neck pain, can be a stressor that leads to a migraine. It can also be part of that prodrome phase. That is the big thing. When I feel a migraine coming on, I almost always feel the stiffness in my shoulders and my neck first. There are a lot of different aspects that individuals will feel. Sometimes they just feel ill and fatigued and drained leading into a migraine. Personally, I always have a really bad anxiety attack right before a migraine too, depending on what kind of migraine I'm having, because migraines tend to vary in length. If I'm having one of my shorter migraines that only lasts like 4 to 6 hours, typically I won't have the anxiety, but I will still have the muscle tension, and I might even have a little bit of an aura. If I'm having one of my longer migraines, the ones that last anywhere from 12 to 72 hours, typically I'll have a really bad panic attack before, and then as soon as a panic attack subsides, then the migraine follows shortly after. The aura itself is just as unique as the migraines. Many individuals, I would say, I think it's the majority of individuals who suffer migraines experience an aura. I do personally. The aura is different from person to person. In many individuals, usually the world around them will tend to dim in color. Usually colors become more saturated, or they may even become brighter before a migraine. And it's very similar. I know I bring it up in all my videos, but I would say it's very similar to the visuals of a psychedelic trip. Many individuals will see geometric patterns to some degree in their auras. Other people, there will be some sort of shifts in perception, something like screen cutting or, like I said, geometry. Personally, my auras, typically I'll see like kind of like a bright light, kind of like, that flash when somebody takes a picture of you back with the flash on, and when you close your eyes you see that flash. I'll typically have something like that typically in my aura before a migraine starts. And the interesting thing about an aura is just because you have the aura doesn't mean that the migraine is going to start immediately after, or it may not start at all. Some individuals experience an aura without any pain or migraine afterwards. And they may have migraines with aura typically, but they just have an aura randomly and then no migraine afterwards. So, the auras are not only different from person to person, but even the timing in which they come before a migraine, or even if they come before a migraine, is different from person to person. For me personally, an aura always comes before a migraine. Typically about 4 to 8 hours before my migraine, I'll have an aura. I'll see the flash. I'll see kind of like a burning after effect, making square designs, kind of. And for the longest time, it used to freak me out. I used to think I was having a stroke or something. And then I'd feel just the pressure behind my head, and then boom, the migraine would start. And that's kind of a notable feature, is I would feel the pressure, and that's part of why I always thought they were sinus headaches, because there was always this kind of pressure behind my head leading into the headache. So yeah, the aura varies from person to person, so is the prodrome phase. I mean, it's not a lot of people, but there's a sizable chunk of people who suffer migraines that just don't even have the aura. They'll have a little bit of a prodrome, and then the migraine will start. Following the prodrome is the actual migraine itself, typically called the headache phase or the pain phase. And that is when you experience the actual migraine headache. And because migraine kind of encompasses this whole 4-phase routine, that's why you don't say a migraine is just a really bad headache. A headache is just a portion of it. And even amongst the headache is just one symptom of the migraine itself. Now, yes, the migraine phase of the migraine, the headache phase of the migraine is primarily this very painful headache, typically felt around the eye, and it's almost always unilateral, affecting one side of the head, which I mentioned earlier in this video. However, the pain can vary from placement to placement amongst people. Everybody kind of gets them differently. Personally, I'll feel it typically right here and then kind of around the eye, but not like in the eye, but always around it, kind of like around the sinus here. And then I'll always feel it in my sinuses too. I don't know if that's just because of the association I've had with sinus headaches for a long time, or if sinuses might even be a trigger. Although according to the app I've been using, sinuses aren't always a trigger for my migraines, so I'm not entirely sure. But that's where I usually feel my pain. And then alongside the pain comes a whole bevy of symptoms from person to person. Some people feel lightheaded. Some people feel dizzy. Some people get vertigo during this part of the headache. The most common thing is nausea. And even amongst the nausea, some individuals vomit with migraines, so they can't even eat anything when they're having a migraine. Personally, I do get the nausea, but I don't vomit. I'm actually pretty good about that. Not to brag, but I typically don't vomit. Even when I get stomach bugs, it usually goes the other way around. So, I don't know. I typically don't vomit, but I always do have the nausea really bad. Sensitivity to light, sensitivity to sound, and sensitivity to smell are very notable in a migraine. And I'll say this even as a dyspraxic, even amongst my typical sensitivity to light that I usually suffer as a dyspraxic, I will note that in a migraine, the sensitivity to light especially is significantly higher. I don't typically have sensitivity to sound, even with my dyspraxia. I also kind of have slightly bad hearing, but when I do have a migraine, I can't stand most sounds either. Like, any sort of sound that is louder than a whisper is unbearable to me. I can't even listen to music when I'm having a migraine. So those are notable. It's kind of like an enhanced acuity, so to speak, like almost like being super aware of the world around you to the point that it is overbearing. Typically, the sensitivity to light and sound isn't unilateral, although it can be. There are things called hemiplegic migraines, which come with drooping eyes and drooping mouth, and usually one side of the face will start to droop, kind of leading to the idea that you may be having a stroke, even though you're not. It's just an effect of the migraine. In many cases, migraines can be silent, in that most people can't tell you're having a migraine, except for the fact that you're just like, oh God, turn that light off. But in other individuals, it is visible. There are some individuals who the affected side of the face, the eye will just start watering and go red. Some individuals even have sensitivity to taste and smell. Some individuals, the pain kind of spreads or switches sides. And that's what's really hard about migraines and defining them and even trying to depict them in something like media, because migraines are fucking unbearable. But they're even different from person to person in effect, how bad the pain is, where the effects are, what side effects they have, if any. And that's really where, like, the difficulty of migraines all is, really. Even amongst neurologists trying to decide what kind of migraine it is, what the trigger may be, how often they happen, and then how to treat that, how to go about that. But the migraine itself is definitely the worst part, in my opinion, either that or the postdrome, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. But that's the key feature of the migraine everybody thinks about is the headache. And yes, the headache is really bad, but it is by no means the only thing that makes a migraine. And the key distinction between migraines and other headaches is not only the side effects, but also that prodrome phase. A slight correction to what I said earlier. Typically, the aura is seen as its own phase, although I personally associate it with the prodrome. But I was just looking because I was thinking there's 4 phases typically, and at least every time I've read about it. But I'm thinking there's a prodrome, the headache, and the postdrome. But like, what could be after the postdrome? And I just looked it up, and the aura is actually seen as its own separate part of the migraine, which is weird because I would consider it part of the prodrome. So apologies for that. But anyway, let's go on to the postdrome. So the postdrome is a series of symptoms, so to speak, that follow a migraine, because even after the migraine itself, you're not exactly out of the woods yet. This can last anywhere from a couple hours to up to 24 after a migraine. I have a very good friend who, after her migraines, for like 24 hours afterwards, like the whole next day, it feels like a hangover to her. And this is a very good comparison. A lot of people call it the migraine hangover. Typically, you'll feel just drained, groggy. There's a lot of fatigue, a lot of you may have some transient pain, but it's not the same as a migraine pain. It's just kind of in the background. To me, it almost feels like anything can trigger the migraine to come back again. And in my experience, some things can. Like, I had a really bad migraine at work once, and I finally got to the postdrome phase because it was one of my longer migraines. And I'm sitting there, and I just feel just drained, like brain fog and everything. And it feels like when you throw water over a campfire, and there's still those smoldering coals. And if you were to throw anything in that fire, it could easily come right back up again. That's essentially what the postdrome feels like to me. So, like, I'm sitting there, I'm starting to feel better. I'm thinking, oh, finally I'm out of this shit. And then one of the people I worked with, like, did one of those loud whistle things as, like, kind of a joke. And it just triggered the migraine to come right back up again. So, you know, even in the postdrome, and he would, for the record, you know, he wasn't doing it to trigger me. He wasn't trying to be an asshole. He was just, you know, it's a long story. But the point is, you know, a postdrome still is part of the migraine. It still sucks. And during the postdrome phase, a migraine can easily be triggered back again. So, you know, while it's a lot of people wouldn't consider it part of the migraine. A lot of people would say, okay, the migraine's over. I would still consider it part of the migraine, and it is considered a phase of the whole entire migraine itself, just like the prodrome and aura and headache portions are. It's probably the hardest part to define in general, just because, I mean, how do you explain what a hangover feels like in general, let alone a migraine hangover? Another notable thing that I tend to feel after my migraines is like a bit of kind of euphoria and rejuvenation, so to speak. Again, this is kind of my parallel to psychedelic trips when it comes to defining a lot of things I have, but I also notice, like, when I have a really long migraine, typically after the prodrome phase, like the world around me starts to look like brighter, but not in an overwhelming way. Like color kind of restores. It's almost like those old Claritin commercials. I know I have some younger people in my audience, but there used to be these Claritin commercials. You can look them up, where during the commercial everything's all kind of blurry and gray, and then they take the Claritin and they say, now I'm Claritin clear, and all of a sudden all the filters go away and everything's all colorful and like pretty again. I tend to get that after a migraine, and it kind of creates this small bit of euphoria and kind of like a feeling, you know what I mean? And that's typically how my migraines go. And I mean, I've kind of detailed through this whole process what my migraines feel like and how they are. So, I mean, this essentially is my personal perception of migraines, and that's essentially what this channel is. It's my life with dyspraxia, how I go about it, and how I personally experience it, and how I've seen other people do so. So that is essentially the bulk of what this video is, because when it comes to treatments, medications, and everything, how to help, that's something I can't do. That is something I can't do that I typically do in all my videos. Like, when it comes to, say, when I was doing my video on panic attacks, or when I was doing my video on anxiety with dyspraxia, or working with dyspraxia, or whatever, I always had some sort of advice or something that's helped me that may help somebody else, but I couldn't tell you. I couldn't tell you because nothing really helps my migraines, honestly. I am seeing my doctor in like 2 weeks, and, well, no, not 2 weeks. It was 2 weeks as of January 1st. It's not January 1st anymore. So I will be seeing my doctor soon, where hopefully I can get on some medication to help it. When I was younger, Tylenol and ibuprofen would help with my headaches. I don't know how, I don't know why, because now they just barely touch it. But when I was younger, maybe I wasn't having migraines all that long ago, and then I started having them in my teenage years and started associating sinus headaches with migraines. I don't know, but Tylenol and ibuprofen used to help. They don't anymore. The only thing that really helps when I'm having a migraine is I'll pop an ibuprofen or a Tylenol, and it'll take the pain from here down to here. It'll at least do that, but the migraine doesn't go away. And then all I can really do is turn my lights off, unless I'm at work where I can't turn the lights off. And that's it. That's all I can do. It doesn't make the migraine go away. So, guys, I wish I could tell you more. I wish I could give you some advice to help. Honestly, see a medical professional. Because even from there, I couldn't give you any suggestions. There are a whole bunch of different things that are being tested for migraines. There's Botox, there's triptans, there's CGRP inhibitors, there's even ergoline derivatives, which are similar to LSD because they're pulled from ergotamine that show some degree of efficacy in migraines. And even then, you may have something that helps your migraines but has really nasty side effects. So even amongst a class of medicines that works, there's different kind of things. So I couldn't give you any sort of idea on what to do or how to help. And I really hate leaving my videos on a note like this because it's depressing, it's sad, it's negative. And you guys know, with every topic, even some of the worst ones, like when I did my video on depression or anxiety or sensory processing issues, I was always able to say, hey, at least there's some positive to be gleaned for this. But honestly, it's frustrating. I couldn't tell you one single positive that comes with migraines. I hate migraines. They suck. This video has kind of devolved into an angry, frustrated rant, especially because for some reason, as I've gotten older, it seems like my migraines have gotten more frequent, and I can't stand that. And I don't like the idea that I'm only going to get older and the migraines may get more frequent. Although maybe that is the light at the end of the tunnel, because my mother at least said that, you know, she used to get migraines really bad throughout her 20s and 30s, and when she hit her 40s, she stopped getting them nearly as much. And once she hit her 50s, she stopped having them at all. But I don't have to wait till I'm 40 or 50 to not have migraines. Like, I'm sick of this. This all sucks. And I will do a video update on this in a couple of weeks. I promise, guys. Again, bug me. Bug me on Reddit. You guys know me. Oren Milne. Just look me up on Reddit. Bug me on Reddit. Ask me for an update video. Because I really hope, and I'm really banking on this doctor's appointment, where I can get some sort of relief from these things, because that's part of why I haven't made content in a while too, is just I get these migraines and I don't want to do anything, even play Minecraft when I have them. I get them like at least once a week anymore. I'm sick of this shit, man. It sucks. Fucking sucks. But anyway, thanks for watching, everyone. I appreciate you guys for sticking around, always being here, following my channel. You guys are awesome. Seriously, every single one of you are. That's the one positive. I can always end my video by saying that, because you guys are just dope. You always comment on my stuff. Most of you guys pop up in my streams when you're online. I understand you can't be. We kind of live on different sides of the globe and on different schedules. But I see a fair amount of you pop up in my streams when I start doing streams and stuff. So I really love your support. I appreciate every single one of you guys. Everyone who's watching this video now, especially if you made it this far. I appreciate you guys. You guys are awesome. Just keep up the good work. Have a good 2025, or at least try to. And have a good one.